who has come all the way from New South Wales in Australia. And David is also unique in our organisation in Action ES 1104 because he is our reciprocal kind of contact in Australia for cost. And it's one of those stories, again, when I was looking for Australian partners to be a part of cost, I kind of did a big trawl and I asked a lot of people of who we should get involved, and I started reading some of David's papers, and he's in charge of, I don't know if you're in charge, but I work or in charge of the Desert Research Station in New South Wales, and it looked like a place that I wanted to visit. not only that, yeah. In fact, most of the people I chose use places. But no, not only that. But David's research was really kind of interesting because in some of my research that I did in the Negev, of course, you come across all these holes that have been dug up by porcupines, etc., and they seem to be one of the ways that plants can actually claim a hold in the landscape, in what I call micro-landscape conditions. And David was working also with the interactions between fauna and flora in the deserts in Australia, and I thought, here, this is an interesting guy doing interesting research. It's something that we don't have in our action, and that's why I got him involved. So David is an associate professor in the School of Biological, Earth and Environmental Sciences. He's been involved in restoration projects in Algeria, China, and Israel. So I won't say any more. He'll say it all himself. Thank you very much, David, for coming all the way.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate the opportunity to leave my hometown where it was 43 degrees centigrade yesterday to come to this beautiful weather here in London. I want to change the tone slightly and perhaps not bog us down with some of the more pessimistic issues associated with land degradation, but hopefully present to you a good news story. I've always been interested in animals, I've always been interested in soils, and I was approached by a group called the Australian Wildlife Conservancy, this non-government agency that are really bringing back animals that are at the brink of extinction and putting them into national park systems and doing a really good job, in fact doing a much better job than government agencies. And they were concerned that there was not enough publicity about the positive ecosystem effects of some of these animals. And so we formed a partnership, and what I wanted to share with you today were the results of some of that work. I want to do three things. First of all, I just want to touch on some of the important issues, not the important issues, but the important principles of our systems, which some of you may know, some of you may not. I then want to look at some evidence that we've found from our experiments, my colleagues and myself, mainly very, very good students, looking at how these animals affect geomorphic processes, ecological processes, hydrological processes. And then thirdly, I want to go from Australia to the US and show you how the loss of animals is critical for the reintroduction of animals is critical for the restoration of ecosystem processes. It would be remiss of me to say that Australia is not desertified. This is a photo of my son on the left when he was 12. He's now 22. He's not quite at the top of that gully, but he's almost there. This is what we've lost over large areas of eastern Australia in only 200 years of European occupation. Huge amounts of erosion. 70% of Australia is arid and semi-arid, and so large areas of Australia are affected by land degradation. Whether it's water erosion, or my colleague here, Gingerlea, who some of you may know, who does a lot of work on wind erosion. It was interesting to hear, I can't remember who said it, but erosion only becomes a problem when people get their washing dirty, or bureaucrats get their cars dirty from dust. So when the dust arrives in the capital cities, this is when we start to get action on erosion and land degradation. If we look at semi-arid systems, or arid systems in general, we find that the big thing that drives arid systems is this spatial and temporal heterogeneity. And the soils, the environment, the microorganisms under these shrubs would be 2 to 3 times higher than in the interspaces. So these systems are driven by the fact that resources are patchily distributed in the landscape, both in space and in time. And it doesn't matter whether we're looking at a landscape scale, with these very, very fertile soils here compared to these quite infertile sands here, or whether we're looking at a patch scale, or we're looking at the scale of individual biological soil crusts in the interspace. So, in 200 years, we've managed to really screw up our country. We've lost about 15 small soil-disturbing mammals, and most of them are from Central Australia, from the arid Australia. The ones that are left, such as the bettong and the bilby, this is also called the rabbit-eared bandicoot. I think it's pretty ugly, personally. It's got a very long snout and big ears and a funny tail. But the bettong is a beautiful animal. It's like a guinea pig, I guess. But they previously occurred right across the continent, and they had a really important role. And they've largely disappeared because of these guys. Rabbits, and of course the European fox. They were the only photos of the foxes I could see. It's a strange thing the farmers in my country do. They shoot these animals and hang them on a fence. It's supposed to be, to serve as a warning to other foxes. So we've lost a lot of our beautiful birds, beautiful animals, the bilby and the bettong. We do have some native soil-disturbing animals left. This is the echidna, which is, I guess, similar to a porcupine or something like that. It's a monotreme, it lays an egg, bizarre, and it has a pouch, really weird sort of dude. So we've lost a lot of these animals. So what I wanted to do is just to show you some data on what these animals actually do to ecosystems and why that might be important. I did first year soil science, and I remember very little of what I did because it was the most boring lecture series I've ever had. But I do remember that the lecturer came in with a brick, a house brick, and we were all half asleep, and he smashed it on the bench, and he said, for every loaf of bread we make in Australia, this is how much soil we lose. And I thought, that's pretty amazing, because our soil formation rates in semi-arid systems are probably 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. So like our soil removal rates, our erosion rates, are probably 2 to 3 orders of magnitude greater than our soil formation rates. So we're losing soil quicker than we're forming it. But what these animals are doing is they're actually moving soil around in the landscape. Now this is a form of erosion, but the soil is not moving out of the system, it's just being redistributed. So we're losing, or where these animals are disturbing, up to 18 tonnes of soil per hectare in these systems. If you look at an annual basis, that's 3 to 4 tonnes per hectare per year being moved around. And that's when they dig, because they're digging for roots and berries and invertebrates. We also know that if you do a budget of how much is coming out and then how much is left on the surface, there's a lot left that's not accounted for, about 90%. And that soil's important because it's feeding tree hummocks and plant hummocks. It's creating opportunities that are really, really important, as we'll see in a sec. We know this soil disturbance by animals is not random. It's highly aggregated. And you can see here this big clumping. This is a transect where we've been monitoring where these animals are digging over the last 3 years. And they're highly specialised. They will dig on the roots of trees and under shrubs. And the critical thing is, as we'll see in a minute, is that they're helping to reinforce the natural patchiness or structure that exists in these ecosystems by concentrating under shrubs and trees. Now, these animals also alter soil water processes, and I put this photo here because this is a rainfall simulator that we've been using. It's probably 30 years old. It's so out of date, it's almost useless. But it's really good to for demonstrations for farmers to show the importance of erosion and erosion processes. And what we're doing here is, I'll just skip to the next one. We're looking at how the disturbance by animals affects the water, the movement of water. And this is a typical density of pits dug by echidnas, those porcupine-like animals. And what we found is that the surface tension in these systems is about the equivalent of about 10 millimetres of rainfall at a rainfall intensity of 50 millimetres per hour. The interesting thing about this is not only are these pits collecting water, but pits are collecting seed. Now, I had a young woman who was working with me. She was in a former life, she'd been a potter and an artist, and she told me she was interested in painting. So I asked her to paint 5,000 seeds with little dots. She took her about a week. She nearly killed me. But what we did with those seeds is we arranged them along the surface here. We put some in the pits, some on the surface, and then we subjected these surfaces to erosion, to rainfall. What we found was that if a seed started on the surface, it ended up in a pit. If a seed started in a pit, it either stayed in that pit or ended up in a different pit. So the pits are catching water, the pits are catching seed. This is where most of the seed is ending up. Now if we flip back to these ones, we know that the pits also hold water for longer. And here's just a study that one of my students was doing. She was very industrious. She was out in the field. They got 22 millimetres of rainfall. She couldn't go anywhere, and she thought, well, I might measure soil moisture in pits. And she eventually published it as part of some other work. So what she found was that the soil moisture in the pit after a day of 22 millimetres of rainfall was about 5 times greater. And even after 5 days, there was still twice as much water in those pits compared with the adjacent non-pit surface. Some of the effects of these animals can be indirect. And here's an example of some work we did a couple of years ago in Madrid, in Spain, showing the link between stiper, biological soil crusts, rabbits, and water flow, in this case infiltration. I just wanted to concentrate on the bottom bit here. We looked at how the diggings by rabbits affected the amount of water going into the soil. And basically the direct effect is nothing. There is no direct effect of rabbits on infiltration. However, when rabbits dig, they disturb the biological soil crust, hence the negative value here. This is almost like a regression coefficient. So they have an an effect of reducing the crust. The crust has an effect of increasing infiltration. It's positive. The indirect effect of rabbits on infiltration is the product of these two values. So the indirect effect of rabbits on infiltration by mediating changes in biological soil crust cover was in fact negative. So this is just to show that some of these interactions are quite complex and they're not as simple as one might expect. So if we now look at Ben's, are these okay?
Do you mind if I ask a question about
Sure,
that?
go far away, Jim.
Yeah, so does that mean that it was not a productive interaction? That you said minus 0.21, I didn't quite know what that means.
Well, what that means is...
Is that good or...
What that means is when a rabbit digs, it reduces soil crust.
Right, and so
And so if that value was 1, it would completely remove the crust. But it's sort of having a very significant negative effect on the crust. So it removes crust, which would normally enhance infiltration. So the effect indirectly is the product of 0.48 and minus 0.55, which is negative 0.21, so it's negatively affecting infiltration. This is called structural equation modelling, and I'm indebted to my Spanish colleagues for pointing me towards this, because it's a really neat way of looking at total systems and how different players can interact. So if we have a look at the effect of these digging animals on ecological processes, and I want to concentrate on plants and litter dynamics. I found this extraordinary, but in our studies we found that in areas of between 250 and 300 millimetres of rainfall, most of the litter was found in the foraging pits. Here it is here. Here's a foraging pit. That coin up there is the equivalent of a 10-cent piece or a quarter in the US. Sorry, 10 penny. 10 penny? Yeah, thank you. Here's another pit. Here's a foraging pit down here created by a goanna, which is a varana lizard. You can see the tunnel down on the leading face where the goanna has dug out a small lizard that lives in that hole, eaten it, and left his pit, and it's filled up with litter. So it didn't really matter whether we were looking in a dune system, in a swale system, or in an area between it, there was always significantly more litter in the pits. And we know that this litter, this is a two-dimensional diagram of the distribution of litter, and here are the litter hotspots. And some of them correspond with trees and shrubs, but others correspond with pits of these soil foraging animals. When we look at the microinvertebrates, microarthropods that are in the pits, we see that there are more broad groups of microarthropods, something like 25% more groups of arthropods, and a greater abundance of arthropods. And in fact, there are this multi-dimensional scaling diagram tells us that there are slight differences in the types of microarthropods that are in the groups, in the pits. And importantly, we talk about, Jim talked about slow variables this morning, and here's a plot of total carbon. Total carbon in the pit, total carbon in the adjacent surface. Total carbon was higher in the pits, no matter where we looked. So was labile carbon, so was mineralisable nitrogen, so was mineral nitrogen, so was total nitrogen. Pretty much whatever we looked at in these soils was higher in the pits than the surface. Now that's not a recently constructed pit, obviously, because an animal comes and digs a hole, it takes a little while to develop. So these are pits that are a couple of months old. We also looked at decomposition, and just to lead you through this gradient along here is a gradient in degradation. These are sites that have never been grazed, they haven't been grazed for a long time. Very, very low levels of grazing, moderate levels of grazing, and very high levels of grazing. This y-axis here represents the relative difference in the pit compared to the surface in terms of decomposition. The positive values are telling us there's more decomposition in the pit than in the surface. And we see here that under an ungrazed situation, a very healthy soil, there's much greater decomposition of material in the pit. As the system becomes more heavily used by sheep and cattle, then there's relatively less, and relatively less here. But I think the really interesting thing here are these two green bars. These green bars are pits dug by an exotic animal, a feral animal, an alien, the rabbit. And in fact, there's more decomposition on the surface than in the pit of the rabbit, which is quite strange. We don't know why that is. We have some experiments underway to try and tease that out. But it appears that the native animals are actually doing a better job at breaking down biological material than the non-native animals. If you collect the litter in the pit and look at the seeds, you'll find that most seeds are found in litter in the pits than on the surface. This is pretty much chalk and cheese. 1,300 individual plants from the pit, 4 from the surface. You don't need stats to tell you that there's a difference there. And the other interesting thing is that plant species richness appears to be greater in the pits of native animals than the pits of exotic animals when you compare the bilby and the bettol with the rabbit. Why might that be? We don't know, but we think it's got to do with the morphology of the pits, the way the animals dig the pits, and we think that the link could be that it's easier for ants to remove seeds from the pits of rabbits because of their shape, which is a gentle ramp-like, compared to the pits of bilbies and bettols, which tend to be more like a cylinder. So we've done lots of experiments, grabbing ants, putting them in pits, seeing how long it takes them to get out, see how long it takes them to move seeds, and it appears that secondary foraging of seeds by ants is constrained when seeds fall into these foraging pits of native animals. And I think this is probably the most interesting of the data we have so far, because what this shows us is that not only do pits have more carbon and nitrogen, not only do they have more seeds, not only do they have more water, but the plants that grow in them are actually growing much better. Now, let me just take you through this. We took soil from pits of about the same age and compared them with what was happening from soil from non-pits. And we subjected them to different watering regimes. So we had pit soil with high and low water, we had surface soil with high and low water. And we grew plants, or a particular plant in them, and we measured a whole lot of attributes: total length, biomass, number of flowers, number of seeds, root to shoot ratio, yada yada yada, all this sort of stuff. We found this is the growth trajectory of a plant growing in a pit with a lot of water. It did pretty damn well. Here's the growth trajectory of a plant growing not in a pit with very low water. Didn't do too well. But look at these two curves here. The growth trajectories for plants growing in a pit with very little water were almost exactly the same as growing on the surface with lots of water. So it's something about growing in the pits, all those extra benefits, that's equivalent to not being in a pit with a lot of water, which was really quite interesting. We published that recently in Plant and Soil. So, Simon, do I have 5 minutes here?
Need a beer?
Like that, I'd be hopeless with a beer. So, the story so far, before we get to the third bit. There's more resources in the pits, more water, more nutrients, more soil. There's more seed, more plants, and plants seem to be doing better. There's more nitrogen and carbon. So, let's go to the western US, to, well, New Mexico, or Idaho, and have a look at some of this stuff in action and what's been happening over the last 100, 200 years, whatever. I used to work on biological soil crusts. I still get excited by them, but not as excited as I do by working on soils and animals. And I was invited to Idaho by a colleague, and went up to the top of this place called Cindercone Butte, and I looked out and I saw all this degradation. And I said to him, "What are they doing? Are they mining down there?" And he said, "No, that's badgers, bloody badgers. Damn varmints." He said they're digging up the soil. And I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. So I got some money, got a grant to go and work on it. And in the western US, the sagebrush ecosystem is critically important for a whole host of sagebrush obligate species. There's sage grouse, a whole bunch of birds. The birds of prey conservation area in Idaho has the largest concentration of raptors because it has a high population of ground squirrels. And here's sagebrush here, and here's ground squirrels, and here's badger, arch enemy, number one of the ground squirrel. But what's happened in the western US is that overgrazing and a whole host of other things, including fire, have converted that beautiful sagebrush steppe into an annual grassland down on the bottom, dominated by a plant called cheatgrass. It's a bromus, and it comes from Eurasia. Cheatgrass because it's said to come up a few months earlier than other plants and cheat the soil of moisture. Someone ought to make a cartoon about that. So, in these systems, badgers disturb the soil. Here's a badger disturbance. The badger goes down and digs up a ground squirrel while the poor thing is hibernating for 8 months of the year. What a terrible thing for this badger charging at you when you're not even awake. And what they do is they disturb all this soil. And we recorded 780 of these disturbances per hectare, which means that 8% of the landscape is covered by these soil disturbances. Now, I kept thinking about this and I thought, this is bizarre. How can this be a good thing? Look, it's been happening for thousands of years, presumably, since the last ice age. So we started to measure some stuff, and I got together with a colleague who some of you may know, Walt Whitford from New Mexico. We started looking at some of the chemistry in these systems. And there's a lot of data here. I don't really want you to concentrate on much, except to show you that the values in the black are less than the values over here, no matter where you are, no matter whether it's burned, whether it's mineral nitrogen or mineralizable nitrogen. So these badgers are bringing up soil that's low in nitrogen because it's subsoil. There's not much nitrogen down there. And what that does is it alters the carbon to nitrogen ratio of the soil. So in effect, what it's doing is it's immobilizing nitrogen. It's making nitrogen, it's immobilizing nitrogen. It's making nitrogen less available to plants. And what we found was that on our mounds, the carbon to nitrogen ratio was significantly larger than off the mound. And most of the plants growing on the mound tended to be native species. In a nitrogen-rich environment, you tend to get a lot of ruderal species, exotic species that are disturbance tolerant. But in this system, the mounds of the badgers tended to be dominated by native plants, often shrubs. And so I hypothesised that perhaps this is a mechanism whereby these systems are able to recover by changing the soil chemistry and giving native plants a competitive advantage over ephemeral nitrogen-loving plants. I haven't been able to get any money to test this, so it will remain merely a hypothesis. So my second example is from the Dryland Desert, a place that I love. And we've heard a lot today, we've heard a bit today about shrubs and how bad they are. Well, Klaus, I actually think shrubs are pretty good. And I'm a shrub hugger, in fact that's my tag. But there's a lot of controversy in Australia about shrubs. And why shrubs are bad. And I agree that in the context of pastoralism, they're not a good thing, because if you have shrubs, you don't have grass. And what's happened in the US, in the western US, is a similar process to what's happened all over the world, in South Africa and Australia, even in Israel, is that we have a conversion of grassland into shrubland. Due to lots of reasons. We could debate it all day. Too much grazing, no fire, maybe too much CO2 in the atmosphere that gives shrubs a competitive advantage. But nonetheless, we have a lot of shrubs. In the western US, there's a soil digging animal which is critically important for a whole host of reasons. For biodiversity, for providing habitat, for caching of seeds, you name it. Lots of work has been done on the banner-tailed kangaroo rat. Now, when the system changes from a grassland to a shrubland, when the grass cover gets below about 20%, these poor female kangaroo rats can't lactate. Can't lactate, so they can't get enough grass protein to produce milk for their young. So you lose the kangaroo rats. Now the interesting thing about these soils here is that very close to the surface is this quite hard indurated layer of calcium carbonate. And shrubs find it difficult to get through that layer unless they've been dug by kangaroo rats, which somehow managed to get through it. So the kangaroo rat is gone, but it's left in its wake this legacy of a mound where it's dug through the caliche, and by digging through the caliche, it has allowed the shrubs to proliferate. In fact, when Walt and I measured the density of shrubs on old kangaroo rat mounds compared to the density between them, we found something like 5 times the density of shrubs. So we've gone from a grassland to a shrubland. We've lost this shrubland, critical icon shrubland species that was important for maintaining a grassland. And not only that, it left a little present behind. It's left a legacy So that converting, restoring, rehabilitating, whatever you want to call it, this shrubland back to a grassland is almost impossible unless we bring back this little guy as well. That's how critically important they are. So just to wind up, just to conclude the presentation today, these foraging pits by animals bring together resources in time and space, and that's critical in desert systems because it reinforces that really important network of nutrient and water-rich patches that are the key to these arid and semi-arid systems. It provides spatial and temporal connectivity. As we've seen from these examples, the activity may assist or hamper recovery. But I guess our challenge now is to understand the landscape level effects. But not only that, to understand how we can use these organisms to help us to restore degraded systems. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
And also for being on time.
Oh, beautiful.
The beer comes afterwards. You know the reputation. Okay. There's some lights. You have the camera. So one just over there.
Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
you can't run away. Not yet. Not yet. Okay. So some questions from the audience, I think. Over there.
David, thanks for a very nice talk. I just want to ask you, is it, I think you must come and study the night rat in the Kalahari, because we have a problem there with that. I don't know if you've ever been there.
No, I'm just waiting for some funding and documentation.
So you can come to this. But the problem is it's very seasonal. And the question is the occurrence of rats and small mammals. Did you find that it was seasonal, especially in road, and also in different types of rainfall, like low rainfall, we get more rat activity than in high rainfall times?
Okay, so perhaps I should preface this by saying that most of my work was done in a conservation reserve that's about 10 kilometres by 50 kilometres that's being fenced off to keep out cats and foxes. Because in the absence of fences, these animals would all be eaten. In fact, they are eaten very quickly. So I'm not able to look at that sort of thing in relation to a rainfall gradient. I agree it's seasonal, very seasonal, and these animals are going to be responding to the seeds that are available, to what's green at the time, what shrubs are coming out. So yes, it is very seasonal. Yeah.
I just want to ask a second, like in reseeding experiments, ants and seed-carrying small mammals are a no-go.
Yeah.
Because they carry away the seed and they burrow the seeds too deep.
Yeah.
You know, that the seeds go too deep in and that they cannot establish and emerge. I mean, that is a negative effect.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure there are negative effects. I mean, look, it's not all good with these guys because you get too many of them and, you know, they turn the soil. They change the patch dynamics from too many pits and not enough runoff. But yeah, I understand the problem. I don't know what the solution is, you know, with ants. I mean, to granulate the seed and make them bigger so they can't be carried up. You know, it's not really my area of expertise, so I couldn't comment.
Sorry, there was okay, James, you're go on.
Thank you. Your talk was excellent. I love that. But it's both positive and negative in my mind. Positive in that you make it something that we tend to forget about the importance of animals. So many of the global models, the ecosystem models that deal with carbon, nitrogen, water dynamics, and abiotic and biotic controls, they never have animals in them. I shouldn't say never, but rarely do they have the important ones that are being linked to GCMs and all that. So this is, I think, an important reminder of that. So that's really exciting. Maybe that's a negative thing because we don't do that. So, but the positive thing is, how do you relate this work to, and this is the true question, I don't know the answer, I've heard about ecological engineers.
Yes.
How does this fit in? Is this similar to that?
Yes, yeah.
In the literature of ecological engineers?
I guess the ecological engineer, the term was coined in the mid-90s by a group from Clive Jones and colleagues, Moshe Shahak, there's a group of them. And it really, look, ecological engineering is basically about animals or organisms altering their environment. Can be as simple as a tree catching water, or it can be an animal digging a hole. So yes, it's all related. I mean, I think the way to look at this in a practical sense, I gave this talk to a group of farmers, and I thought, they'd all be yawning. And this guy got up and he said, "This is amazing. We've got these echidnas. They run around everywhere. I didn't know that was so important. You're telling me that an echidna is going to produce grass that grows twice as much because it's digging, because it's growing, it's building a pit. Well, what I need to do is to make sure that I have enough woodland to protect these animals, so they've got a habitat, so I'm not hitting them on the road and all this sort of stuff." So it's about, a lot of it really is about educating and drawing to people's attention the importance of these things, and then it'll kind of, well, I'm hoping it will just flow.
There are two questions actually from there. What have you two, Christina?
David, I really enjoyed it. It was amazing talk. Thank you very much. But I don't agree with what you said.
Excellent.
Because I really think that your study showed what we have in plants that is a nursery plant. So rather than engineers, they are facilitating. And this is what I was telling you. It was that...
Well, I agree. The paper that we printed and we published in Plant Soil, we tried to couch that in terms of facilitation.
Yeah.
We tried to say these animals are facilitating plant growth by changing the soil. Oh, the facilitation mafia. They wouldn't have a bar.
They're crazy.
They wouldn't have a bar. We had to change the title.
But the nursery plants do exactly the same thing that your peat does.
Yes.
So you have a native plant
Yes.
that creates, it optimizes
Absolutely.
the conditions. You do exactly the same thing.
They're another system engineer.
No, it's a more, it's different.
I understand what you're
You
saying.
change the functional and you don't change the functional here.
There are two people with hands. I'll start off with
Sorry.
you first, and then to Violet.
Nice presentation. And you show us a slide in which demonstrates that the pits are concentrated along the trunk.
Yes, along the roots of the tree.
And the scale are in meter, 400 meter, and
50
5,000.
50 meter by, that was centimeters.
Centimeters.
4 meters by 50 meters. Yeah, sorry.
Do you have any pedagogical explanation for this? I mean, the soil is different? or
No,
it's
they are probably eating fungi on the roots of trees. So you can see that one of them had a line, and I suspect it was eating the fungi on the roots of the tree, or it was digging up grubs that grow on the roots of trees. So most of the foraging is underneath a shrub, or underneath a tree, or along the root of a tree. So it's kind of reinforcing this kind of patchiness that exists.
Violet?
Yeah, what I would ask myself is if you imagine that these animals do not exist in a specific ecosystem, which you would like to restore,
Yes.
how could you imitate the
Yes.
animals?
Yes. That's a $1 million question.
That's easy. 1,000 Australian students, a few bears, taken away.
Yeah, no, Australians don't do very well. I'd probably get someone else.
No, but do you think the reason, as well as what I was thinking, is the hole where you are destructing the calcium carbonate, for example, and then a hole is a physical thing where the litter goes into, and then you get an accumulation of litter and nutrients.
Yeah.
Or do you think that these animals
No.
have an additional?
No. I think it's the physical creation of a pit. Jim, do you want to?
I was going to ask you, is the answer to that, is an example of that Jim Brown's work when he did that study of the bioorganization of ecosystems? Did he not, I don't remember, I'm hoping you do, where he fenced off the area, did he not introduce some of the native engineers to these animals and found these tremendous differences?
Yes.
Is that?
It's a couple. it's a complex issue. I think the reason it's working, I mean, we try and do it organically. And what do? We have a huge swarm, you know, we have those pillars that create pits. And we do hundreds of hectares. It's random. What the animals are doing is kind of random. Well, it's not really random, but it's in various locations. And I really don't know.
But not only the physical, it's also the organic matter that it
Oh, sure, absolutely, sure, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
You cannot use mechanically.
Why can't you? But why can't you do it mechanically?
Because you cannot insert different depths, the amount of organic matter.
But it mounts. But then
The amount is different. See, you remember the work we did on porcupine?
Yes.
They are digging the roots of plant.
Yeah.
They eat half of the plant.
Yeah.
And the amount half the roots.
Yeah.
The amount of organic matter is accumulated over in the water. And that what gives the plants a higher biomass in the following growing season. The same thing with the end activity.
Maybe we can talk about this over.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Okay. I'll have the last word on it. I also think it's got to do with change of microclimate, also, and possibly radiation, and creating a bit of shade and just changing the microclimate a bit. Okay. All right. We've got to move on. Okay. The last focus of today is a report really by our working group leaders. We have 5 working groups, but one is about dissemination. We have 4 working group leaders, and they have particular subject matters and topics that we've divided the action into, and we're going to just have a brief feedback from these working group leaders as part of our meeting towards the end of our conference today. So the first person will be Reiners Holbeck Kotara Zamfir, and he's going to be talking working group 1, Understanding Land Degradation and Causality, and then Professor Christoph Kuls, and he's going to talk about the focus on soils and hydrology. Then we'll have Christina Branchino from University of Lisbon talking about the focus on plants and ecology, and then Gudrun Swilch from the University of Bern and the focus on land management. Okay, thank you. Which one is yours?
After the speeches of so many, it was quite a challenge to be here. But it's my fault. I proposed myself to be the leader of this working group. Nobody said no, thank you. So here I am. Well, so these are the objectives of our working group. First working group, we have the understanding of the big picture and gathering the dispersed knowledge of past and present research. We have to formulate a baseline for statements of form, especially with regard to the dryland areas of Europe, and to review the many direct and indirect factors that create land degradation in arid lands. But there are not easy tasks, especially because I'm coming from a different field. I'm a civil engineer and I work on irrigation and drainage, so I had to adapt to other fields. And the major tasks of our working group are to summarize the basis and framework for restoration of the background, causes, indicators of land, and the results of restoration and mitigation in dry and arid areas, and to identify the gaps in the knowledge regarding the causality and land degradation processes. As activities, we have workshops, meetings, and conferences. And this is a calendar for the first 6 months. We created so far a Facebook page for the working group 1, where it's relatively it's not a developed Facebook page, but exists, so we'll improve it in the next period. We contacted the International Committee for Anthropogenic Soils, and thanks to our colleague Carmelo, we already have a draft paper about anthropogenic soils. I would like to thank all my colleagues for their support so far. We also have a draft template for case studies, and we prepare a skeleton for the second review paper, which will refer to the understanding European picture, causes, effects, and remedies. And we also have a pending issue, a webpage for the working group first, and this is of my fault, but we'll resolve this issue as soon as possible. For the next few months, we will try to provide a comprehensive definition and knowledge in the form of a report for a clear apprehension of action key terms. There are some key terms in this action which must be explained, and we will try also to provide a comprehensive review of direct and indirect factors that create land degradation in arid lands. First of all, we surf the existing knowledge, and what we discover is that there is no single agreed definition of the term drylands. We also observe for the existing knowledge that the management of the drylands area should focus on the best management of available water. Also that the drylands may result from a combination between climatic aridity and plant physiological aridity, and the drylands are presenting a high variability over time. Referring to desertification, I stop at this worldwide review realized by Gans and Lamlin. In 2004, they analyzed 132 case studies, and they identified 4 major categories of proximal causal agents: invisibility, agricultural impact, wood extraction, and infrastructure extraction. And what they observed that 10% of the case studies were driven by a single cause, 30% were attributable to a combination of 2 causes, and 60% were a combination of 3 or 4 causes. Also, we observed that the scientists have not reached a consensus about the standard set of indicators to use in monitoring desertification. Many indices were not proposed to describe not the desertification, but the susceptibility of drylands to desertification. Also, the causes and consequences of dryland degradation remain controversial and often poorly understood. And not on the last, the desertification potential. It's a potential but not necessarily an outcome of land degradation. We also study a new framework which was presented by Oki in 2011, which explains the major forms of desertification in dryland ecosystem on the basis of landscape connectivity. They link the erosion processes with the vegetation shifts, with the connected pathways, and with the dynamics of land degradation. At the end, they highlight the importance of understanding the role of connectivity in landscape of sustainable management of drylands. Referring to restoration, we observe that it's important to have a sound understanding of both the biophysical and human dimensions of the causality. It is also important to incorporate the knowledge of dryland structure and functioning in management actions, and to evaluate and incorporate the existing socio-economic attributes and assess the potential for successful rehabilitation. There are many hot questions which are related to our action and to our work. Of course, it's not easy to answer all of these hot questions, but we'll try to gather some answers to provide a better image on the work of Working Group 1. The timetable for the next period. Well, a deadline for June 2013, so in the next couple of months, we will have to provide a better understanding of the European picture to identify the basics. For the October 2013, we will have to accomplish the task 1.1.3 data collection and understanding causes, effects, and remedies. For 2015, or until 2015, we'll have to analyze country by country scenarios, and we'll have on the end to finalize the European picture. Also, I think that it's important that these country by country scenarios to analyze also the legislation from different countries which are referring to the desertification, because, at least which I observed in Romania, is that the legislation referring to desertification has a lot of errors. They are making many mistakes. They are confounding different terms. They put an equal between aridity and drought or other terms like this. Among our main outputs will be 4 reports, one info per year, one book which will synthesize our work, and we'll try to finish at least 6 scientific papers. Also, I think that it will be very important to try to organize like an international conference for the early stage researchers and for the PhD students, because they must be much more involved in these topics and these problems. I think I finished earlier than I was supposed to. Thank you.
Thanks, George. If there are any questions, we can take one question, because I think we're running a bit behind time. Anybody got anything? The work of the working groups, of course, will be updated continuously on the web page, so you can keep in touch with that. Our next working group leader is Professor Christoph Pils. And he's from the University of Freiburg.
Thank you. I want to use the opportunity to introduce the work of Working Group 2, and I invite everyone interested in this work of contributing contacting us. Our working group focuses on traditional and innovative systems. So from the beginning we are talking about land use systems, interaction of environment and humans, the way they use land, and we will focus on soil and hydrology. The working group members are Simon Berkovich, Eduardo Constantini, Barret Geissen, myself, Stephen Ferno, Laszlo Martin, and Cohen Bitzema. These different scientists contribute from different perspectives, as I will show, from soil science, hydrology, ecology, physical geography. The whole program of the working group 2 is shown in this table. Actually, the first meeting workshop will take place tomorrow, focusing on understanding current practice and scenarios. We will then collect data on traditional innovative systems related to soil and hydrology, assess the existing systems, look at new systems and new methods, and I'm very glad that we have had so much input from all continents and different projects. Very, very useful and valuable for our work. A very important component is the exchange of early stage researchers. So this is also an activity that should start soon. And then we will have finalizing outcomes. I just want to highlight some aspects that have been demonstrated and mentioned in the tasks that we have heard. This is a map of the deserts, the Namib Desert, and one idea that we have seen in several talks is the importance of heterogeneity. So everything is in 3D now, so we should also look at ecosystems in drylands in 3 dimensions. This is just now the same region tilted and the hydrology of it. And if we now start looking at water flows in this environment, and we have done this with different modeling tools, we see that it's highly, highly complex. We think this is a good approach towards soil and water in drylands to realize this heterogeneity. So you see not only the 2-dimensional flows here, these are the different directions, but also the 3-dimensional component in blue and in red, where upward means blue and downward means red. So it's not difficult to imagine the impact this has on water in a dry environment when we have concentration and these different movements. As we have seen in the previous talk from Australia, we can take this system that creates heterogeneity, here visualized as a topo sequence or a different topography, and just zoom it in, and we will find the same distribution processes at the scale of decimeters and centimeters, and even in aggregates. So there's very interesting research on soils and on the role of aggregates. We will try to include these aspects in our working group. Another aspect that we try to look at is time. This is a visualization of groundwater flow in the same dynamic desert. These lines show the direction and different depths of flows and time scales. And I just want to point out that we are here talking about time scales of not only years, but decades, hundreds of years, and more if we look at groundwater. So time is very important. If we look at a desert landscape, we see snapshots of different adaptation stages to climate change. So we don't see just what's happening now. We see different states of the ecosystem at the same time. So another aspect of our working group will be the time for change. This has been mentioned by a talk from South Africa, that restoration takes time. And this time can be considerable. It can be decades or more. And one important thing, I think, is that we try to understand the time actions take to fully realize their impact. So these are curves or methods from Australia, in fact, where you see the time after environmental change, the percent of accumulated change for different residence times of systems, when you have increased recharge or decreased recharge, and you can actually anticipate or provide a prognosis on how fast changes will take place. And the last aspect I want to highlight is systems. So this is now an arid system with soils and water, and we just use the method here visualizing the different impacts human activity has. And if we do it, we realize that actually pumping of water or tillage, if you look at soils, influences almost all the functions of evaporation, recharge, in and outflow of the system. And one interesting aspect will be to look at the different effects human activities have on soils and hydrology, and on assist farmers and environmental managers in visualizing things. This is a summary on the last slide of the topics that we have collected among the working group. So we will deal with soil aridity, functions and processes of soils, looking at factors reducing, increasing soil aridity, and the soil water retention curve plays a very important role in this context, as we have seen in the talk from Spain. And the idea is to look at smart land use and effects with which we can improve soil water retention capacity. Another aspect is crusts. This is very important in relation to heterogeneity and space. How do they develop? How are they destroyed? Which function do they have on nutrients and biology? One aspect that has been mentioned that is contributed from a major European project, Cascade, is experiments, monitoring. We have also seen the examples from Spain. We will try to collect data from sites, experimental data on hydrology and soils, and I think it's a good idea, and I took this idea from you, to look at slow variables and develop monitoring for the slow changes, for the slow build-up of organic matter and of the slow change of soil hydrology functions. So this will be something that we will consider. And finally, a hydrologist said, hydrology is nothing without prediction. We will need to develop tools for prediction, so we will try to develop advice on right decisions, and on strategic decisions, also looking ahead for 10 years. And for this, of course, the response time, as I highlighted before, is very important. aspect that environmental change and restoration takes. Thank you very much.